course, we've had the coronation weekend, massive success, but it kind of hid from view what happened in the local elections last week. Well, if the Tories had a bad day across the country, they had in Bournemouth, I think, something facing quite close to being an electoral catastrophe. They did very badly indeed. And since then, we've learned that Rishi Sunak's big promise to get rid of thousands of EU laws suddenly isn't going to happen. And I think in places like Bournemouth, which were solid Brexit voting areas and have been solid Conservative voting areas, there is a real sense of disappointment. Or perhaps I should say that's even verging on anger. And that's what you saw from voters here in Bournemouth last week. Well, who better to have on the programme than the current leader of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. And I do say current, Philip Broadhead. Welcome to the show. That may not be the kindest introduction, but the numbers are pretty brutal, aren't they? Conservatives down 24 seats in this council. Labour up, the Liberal Democrats up quite considerably. Were you being punished here for what's happened to the Tory Party nationally, or for what you've done here locally?
Well, I think we saw across the country, we got a real pummelling almost everywhere you look. We now have 90 councils across the country that are in no overall control. That means nobody's running the show. It ends up with paralysis. Everyone's got a veto, which I think is a bit of self-punishment, actually. But we knocked on a lot of doors and we heard from people. There's a lot of anger out there. There was a message that quite often they want to send to the government. I think the problem with this election is that there were loads of messages that we were hearing. Some people didn't like the direction we're going. Some people don't like what's been happening in government for the last year. We had a similar set of elections back in 2019 where in the local elections people were voting for national issues, but it was pretty clear what those issues there were then. Now there's a whole host of them.
Theresa May failing on Brexit.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Of course, within weeks of that, the Brexit Party did rather well in this constituency and elsewhere too. But here's the point. This really is the point. That these results we're comparing against really quite historic lows for the Conservative Party. And across the country, the party's lost a third of its councillors. In Bournemouth, you've lost more than that. Is there any way back?
Yeah, I think there is. I think one of the... Well, let's look at the statistics. We as a party were pummeled. We did really, really poorly. Nobody else really cut through. You only look in the council we're in here, it is going to be a hung council yet again. We saw Labour, they moved forward a little bit, but not that much. If we had the results in these local elections as a general election, we'd have a hung parliament. So Labour haven't moved forward as much as they want. There was a lot of protest voting going on. And to be fair, when we were talking to people on the doorstep, while people were angry, while they wanted to send a message, they were positively saying that at least things have calmed down, they're heading in the right direction, that the 5 priorities that Rishi has put forward probably aren't going to set the world on fire, but are respectful of what people are looking for.
I accept
think there is
stability. Yeah. I mean, you know, we had 3 prime ministers and 4 chancellors and 5 education secretaries. I mean, you know, it was pretty... So, no, Rishi's brought stability. Yeah. Stability in high taxes. Stability in big government. Stability in punishing small business. And now stability in not delivering a proper Brexit. That's not what these voters in Bournemouth want.
Yeah, and that's a challenge that Rishi will have over the next 12 to 18 months before the election. He's put a plan in place for some of the basics. I think we saw with the results across the country, that's probably not quite enough. He will A, need to deliver on them, but B, I think there needs to be a much more refined sense of a positive future. Now, the benefit is, who else is giving that? You know, we've got a council here that might well be run by the Liberal Democrats in a few weeks' time. Do they have a positive vision nationally or locally? So there was a lot of protests going on. I think there's a vacuum there. We can fill it. We've just got to get on and start doing it.
A lot of protest, Philip, but perhaps there's quite a lot to protest about.
Yeah, and we heard that. I think we heard that loud and clear. Now they've got to do something about it.
If we get tactical voting, and there was clearly, here and elsewhere in the local elections, deals being done between Labour and the Lib Dems and Greens in some parts of the country, but if we get big-scale tactical voting at the general election, even here in Bournemouth, you know, Conor Burns, who's the MP for this constituency, if everyone says, right, the way to beat the Tories is to vote Lib Dem, you could even be in trouble here.
Yeah, and we've seen a flavour of that at these elections. There are websites now that are trying to organise the anti-Tory vote or the pro, you know, so it's something that's happened in other parts of the world. It is coming over here. We saw it on a local level through these elections. But I think the slight positive as a party, thinking about my party that we've got, is that I can't see it translating in as quite a refined way in the general election. I'll tell you what, I look here, the number of the seats that you've mentioned, according to the polls, the biggest threat they have would be Labour, and yet in those areas there was quite a big protest vote to independents, other parties. We're not seeing this push towards Labour that would then threaten the general election.
Clearly, Labour...
But it's always a danger.
No, clearly, Labour are not going to win Bournemouth West at the next election. That is perfectly clear. But if all the Labour voters in Bournemouth West say, do you know what, actually the Lib Dems have picked a good person, then you could be in trouble.
Yeah, and that's possible.
And remember that just up the road, Eastleigh, Romsey, these are all constituencies within striking distance. Southampton, they've all been Lib Dem in the last 20 years.
They have. What I would say is that there are people that will protest vote at a local election. When it comes to the general election, I think they know what is at stake. And people are a bit more loose, I think, with their votes. They'll lend a vote here or there to a variety of parties at the local elections. I can tell you from knocking on doors, there are some people that will never vote for certain parties when it comes to the general. So we know as a party we've got work to do. We hear the message loud and clear. We've now got to put a positive message for the future.
Give me one big reason why people should think about voting Conservative at the next election. One big reason.
Well, one big reason is look at the hassle and the catastrophes that we've had to put up with across a global level. Could you see anybody else doing a better job, be it the pandemic, be it the cost of living crisis? I don't hear any fanfare from all the other parties of big answers to these big problems. So I still believe passionately as a Conservative we're the only party that is able to deal with some of those challenges. And also, let's look at what's coming from the other side. Let's look at what Keir Starmer is saying. I mean, he's got a party that's split.
I know. Vote for us, the other lot are worse. I'm bored with that, Philip.
But it's true, Nigel.
I'm bored with it. I'm bored with it.
And I accept. It's not enough, but it's a huge part. It's a huge part.
That's what we've sunk to in British politics. You think we're bad? Have a look at the other lot.